All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today for the Canberra Business Chamber's event on AI in Action, presented in this with the support of Telstra, ECFO and MV Law, so thank you all very much for coming. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Greg Harford, I'm the Chief Executive of the Business Chamber. We do have some refreshments down the back, a glass of wine and something to drink and something to nibble on, so if you do feel the need to go and grab something during the session, feel free, otherwise there'll be an opportunity at the end. Now today we're exploring AI, artificial intelligence, through three lenses. We're talking about how to implement it into enterprise businesses. We're talking about early adoption. We're talking about governance and legal perspectives. And we've got three great people on our panel today. We've got Nathan Gumley, who is the Executive IT for Software Engineering for Telstra, who's responsible for leading AI strategy, data transformation and data at scale. Greg Borchardt on the right is an early adopter of AI from a SME point of view and is focused on turning AI into measurable returns on investment. And Tanya Burles, the CEO of MV Law, thank you for hosting us here today, is going to bring a governance, legal and sort of people perspective to all of this. So we will have an opportunity for some questions towards the end, I think, but we'll see how we go for time. So we'll start with you, Greg, and perhaps just get you to have a bit of a chat to us about why you adopted AI in your business in the first place, and how did you choose your first AI use case, and how did you choose your tools?
Okay, thank you. So I adopted AI because I thought it was cool. That was really why I did it. I just thought it was interesting. I first started, like everyone else did, with ChatGPT. I used Google Workspace for my business. So now I'm pretty well 100% within the ecosystem using Gemini and its associated tools. It's got to a point now where I'm automating processes where, so I'm an accountant and small business is my domain. Some clients will send me emails of receipts, for example, and I have agents that will read the email, take the attachment, send it to Gemini API for getting the data from that, the date, the description, lines, multiple lines, the amounts, GST, all the bits that we really need. Come back and create a spend money transaction into Xero. Push that to Xero and attach a copy of that document against the spend money transaction, and then send me a chat that says, I've done it, click the link, I've saved that in your Google Drive account if you want to see it. And the next day I go in and just click reconcile and it's done. That process would take, I don't know, a few minutes, I suppose, to do it manually every day. And now it's, well, a couple of seconds to click the button the next day. That's pretty much it. So that's sort of the fast track evolution where it came from before. I don't use anything other than just the tools within Gemini. I didn't write the code myself. I've been coding for 10 years in AppScript, but I use Gemini to write the code. I use Gemini to, in the same chat, I said, well, I've got to talk about this on LinkedIn. This was on Friday last week. So Gemini wrote the LinkedIn page for me and the Facebook pages, Facebook posts. It was my third ever post on LinkedIn, for what it's worth. I'm not a great social media fan, star thing. As at half an hour ago, that post, which was generated by Gemini, was about 38,000 impressions. So it's doing something that resonates with a few people out there.
Yeah, that's cool.
So a real value add from a time saving and a return point of view. What's been the cost of implementation? Relatively small.
The cost of implementation is my time. It took about probably 3 or 4 hours, probably half a day. But now another client could come along and I could just copy and paste the code to another one, which would be like 10 minutes, and just redo so the prompt is using the Gemini API. So there's a prompt within the script that says, I want you to get this information from the receipt and this is what I want to know about it. And I would just redraft that for the next one relative to the next client. that's pretty important. Just change a couple of folder IDs where things get saved, so it's not a complicated thing.
Thanks. Sorry, we've only got one mic here, and AI is not quite good enough to hand it around manually. Nathan, let's come to you. Telstra is obviously a huge business. What's one task in your business that AI still can't do well, and why not?
Probably sounds a bit ironic as the person that runs software engineering, but I think we've probably found that on the software engineering side at scale, just generating code, it doesn't do particularly well in aggregate. We have to be very pointed. Certain tools for certain parts of the software engineering process is pretty key. It does have the tendency to hallucinate every now and again, and if you don't know that's in there and you don't know how to write the code from scratch, that can catch up with you pretty quickly. So that's always a fun one for me. But yeah, that's the one that we're still kind of working on, and our approach has been from one tool to rule them all to really figuring out how we optimise certain parts of AI tooling for different parts of how we write software. So that's probably the one thing that I don't think it's been able to do particularly effectively yet, but there's changes every week. So yeah.
And that's a really interesting observation, that you still need people who know how to code in order to drive it and check it. So does that sort of put a lie to the scare stories that we hear about 95% of jobs disappearing over the next decade?
Yeah, that's a really big thing for us. I think the reality is the nature of the skill sets you need change, and that's what we found in our business is you might need people that are better at optimising the effectiveness of certain tools as opposed to writing necessarily knowing how to or writing the code themselves bottom up. They obviously still need the skill set to be able to debug a lot of the code that we generate from those tools. But yeah, it's certainly, I think, a story for us around how the nature of the skill sets change. It's the same in, let's say, different parts of kind of business insights and reporting for us. We've had traditionally quite large teams that do a lot of reporting for a business the size and scale of Telstra. But as you have AI being more effective at the ability to generate that insight without the need of people creating reports, how do you take the skill sets of some of those people we have and look at the effectiveness of the data quality, measuring, testing data quality for what's going into a particular tool that's generating that insight. So for me, I don't think it's necessarily a story about AI replacing the jobs of humans, but I think the fundamental skills of what we do day in, day out changing pretty rapidly. So
how, we're early 2026 now, this is a rapidly evolving space. How entrenched is AI now within Telstra, and what kind of minimum data or process maturity did you need to have in the business before it made sense to move to AI?
Yeah, look, it's heavily entrenched for us. I think one of the key things that we really needed to be clear on as an organisation was that we didn't want to be an AI company, but we wanted to be a leader in the way that we applied AI to our business to better serve our customers. And so that's been a really big mantra, particularly in the last couple of years, top down from our board, which has been great. I think that journey for us was definitely around data quality. As you can imagine, some of the size and scale of Telstra, the amount of data platforms we have was pretty enormous. I think we're down to about 35 now, might be slightly less, but that was in the hundreds. And data quality is a really important story. The first use case for us was actually looking at how we could better help customers. And if you're someone at a retail store for us or helping someone over the phone, one of the hardest things you have to do is actually figure out what the customer problem is and how to solve it. And typically that revolved into going into a lot of knowledge-based articles, trying to find a particular knowledge article to follow the steps and solve the customer problem. And so we built something called Ask Telstra, which was really just allowing our people to be able to ask questions to get access to that knowledge faster. 3 months into deployment, we're all there high-fiving and everyone's coming back and saying, hey, your tool's no good, it doesn't work. It's not just spitting out the answer. It wasn't the tool, it was the data. The knowledge-based articles themselves were out of date. And so what we were doing is amplifying the core of the issue for our people. We were just doing it slightly faster. And so it shifted our focus on not necessarily how we improve the tool, but how we fix that underlying data so we have the right knowledge being presented to people at the right point in time and testing and validating that. So it really kind of expands where you've got to put your focus. But I would say data integrity, data quality is core to that for sure.
And I think that's certainly my observation, is that you need to have great data going into your AI tools in order to get good outputs, because if you've got a lot of rubbish in the back end, or you're just searching the internet essentially using your AI tools, you're not going to get the best results. Greg, I'm going to just sort of jump back to you, and then we'll come to Tanya in a moment. But what's your rule of thumb for an ROI on AI tools? What sort of payback period do you need, or what sort of productivity targets do you set for yourself when you're looking at a new tool?
I don't use many tools. I just use the Gemini within Google Workspace. So I think that's probably. I have had to upgrade. So I think the standard thing's $20 a month or something with Gemini within the standard business model. I am developing a cash flow forecast model using anti-gravity. That's like within AppScript, which is essentially JavaScript. It's a big project. And I found I was running out of tokens in December. I had to upgrade for that. So it's like $200 a month, which is still pretty cheap compared to the time I have to wait out another month for things to start up again. I think probably for me personally, I'm mindful that a lot of businesses spend a lot more money on subscriptions for every damn thing. And as AI comes along, there's another subscription model out there. Oh, you can pay for this and you can get more, and they run away, and that's become a big problem for small business in particular. Well, big business too, actually. Government's like terrible for it. All these Microsoft subscriptions out there, they don't know how many they've got, and it's pretty big. So I think, to me, it's more, as much as anything else, about if I can do something and repeat it, if I can do something and stretch it out to make it, okay, I might have spent 4 hours developing something or getting a process right, but if I could redeploy that in 5 minutes for the next person, then the time savings become worth the while. That's part of the process. And what can I do that, if I'm paying for another subscription for something else right now, what can I do myself that I can replace that with, and then roll it out to clients?
I just have to remind you in passing that for everyone in the room, the most important subscription you can pay each year is your Canberra So do sort that out as you go, please. But Nathan, sort of to ask the same question of you, like in a much bigger business, what sort of ROI are you looking for when you're looking to invest in AI?
Yeah, look, I don't know if there's a specific ROI target for us. We kind of do that in aggregate. I don't think we apply a different lens to that for AI that we would against our regular projects, like software engineering projects. I think the key learning for us has probably been there's a lot of promise of value, which is great. Don't disrepute that, but I think it's actually the net benefit that's really important. And one of the things that I think we're finding, which small or big business is the same thing, everybody will speak to you about an AI story that talks about all this great gross value, but there is a cost, to your point, and I think that cost will change over time. And so for us, it's to be really conscious of those decisions with a good understanding of net benefit. And for us, some of that is through the form of subscriptions, but I think with the size of Gal's culture, a lot of us is more consumption-based token pricing, and that token pricing can run away with you pretty quickly. So for us, it's actually trying to be a little bit more open around how we experiment in that space, being really conscious of what we prioritise to do, which is typically off driving the most amount of value, but making sure we're really on top of if we've deployed something and we're not seeing the return, not leaving it there, because that can continue to run and operate and cost you money and not deliver the return. So I think it's a really exciting environment to step into, to test, to look at where the opportunities are, a little bit like what you've done, Greg, but I ought to always be very conscious of if it's not delivering that return, pulling it back really quickly and going and doing something else. I like that mantra you have of, hey, if this can replace something else that I'm paying for today but deliver more value, let's do that. And I think you should continue to apply that to anything you do in the AI space. That's been the key learning for us.
Thank you. So Tanya, from your point of view, the legal profession generally, I think, has been a bit slower in sort of embracing the world of AI, and I know you haven't rolled out AI tools in your core operations as yet. What do you, from your point of view, what would need to be in place, either from sort of a people governance or risk point of view, before you'd be comfortable rolling it out?
Good question. Yeah, the legal industry can be a bit slow on rolling out a lot of these things, but we might sort of reverse that and just talk about governance in the first place. I think we need to ensure that we've got really good, clear policies, because the use of AI is, quite a security risk, I think, or we think. It has a tendency to hallucinate, so we've got to be really careful with that. And also having, good policies that will talk about, good acceptable use of AI, I think is important. For us, it's not about being a leader. I can appreciate why that would be Telstra's wish or mantra, but for us, it's about watching what's happening in this space and taking it a bit slower. When it comes to the privacy side of things, it's really important that we're comfortable around the privacy and the controls that we have. The data, where is that data going? For a small to medium law firm like we are, we don't have those never-ending pools of funds, I guess, to build our own, at this stage, AI tools. A lot of the top tiers are doing that, and they can be a lot more comfortable. But certainly the small to medium law firms are very adverse to rushing into this. When it comes to the people, I think it's more about, we want to see our people flourish, and organic growth is really important to us. Our clients still want that face-to-face ability to be able to meet with people. They're not looking to just, have us generate things through AI technology at this stage. We've had a couple of clients who might send us, AI-generated documents and say, can you review these? And, what we're getting is, quite frankly, rubbish, and wouldn't hold up in a court. So we're really quite, it's important to us that we look after our people, because that's really what our client base is still looking for.
How far away are we, do you think, from the legal profession jumping in boots and all?
Yeah, as I said, I think you'll find a lot of the top tiers have been in it for some time. It's more on that sort of large documentation rollout, review of large documentation and things like that. For us here, I think it's more about, as I said, going in a bit slower, running some pilot programs. It's a really interesting space. I'm a little bit like you, I quite like it. We do use it here, but not necessarily in the legal space, more in the business services area. And I think it has a lot of value to add there. But for us, it's really about rolling out a pilot, making sure we've got that governance and that privacy and that data side sorted out, and that we've got our own tools here, so that we're ensuring we're not just, teaching external data, just building that data bank for everybody else, keeping our clients' information secure.
Now, Tanya, you raised questions about privacy and cyber security. So, Nathan, I'm going to turn to you on this. What new risks to cyber security do you have to keep in mind when adopting AI? How do you mitigate them? And do you think they're really any different to sort of the risks around privacy and security in a non-AI world?
I actually think the principles are still the same. I think, to your point, Tanya, there's a massive element of where the data is, and I think that the risk is data being in the wrong place and some of the models going a little bit haywire. So if a model is compromised and you've got your data in that model, that's a scary thought. That wasn't existing a little while ago. But the same principle is still be very clear on where your data is and what data you're storing and why you're storing it, and making sure that you're purging it if you don't need it. So when I look at that threat landscape, it's more sophisticated than ever, right? And we're seeing parts of that in the way that AI can present out to humans from an authenticity perspective. There's definitely more sophistication in terms of models and where data can go and where it can find its path to maybe the wrong people. But I still think those same simple principles of even just the Australian Government Essential 8 are still rock solid. Know where your data is, make sure that you've got limited access to the right people, make sure you've got someone accountable for it, especially in a small business, that you're doing your audits, and that for things like, which seem very boring and mundane, a good chunk of, I think our group spends about 35 to 40% of our time making sure things are patched, that all your security vulnerabilities are addressed, that your hardware's not out of date, that you've got the right support in place, and that you've got good policy process and incident management in place as well. And so that's for us as a big business, but I certainly think that extends right down to small businesses, and the same posture exists. It's a good way to keep you safe.
Greg, From a small business point of view, what cyber risks worry you the most around AI, and perhaps some of your clients might be using AI tools and managing their client data? What are you seeing as the biggest risks?
If you're using AI generally in a free AI tool, then your data's out in the open. If it's enterprise level AI, so if you're in the Microsoft world and you've got with your Microsoft stuff, you're using Copilot, or in the Google stuff like I am, you're using Gemini, that's not trained on not training models, that's your data. So I think there's probably the risk. One risk might be that if you want to go and use another model for some other reason that's outside of your enterprise, that you're exposed, your data's exposed. And I think also, especially when people haven't had the experience using AI and they prompt and they're pretty impressed with, as you all were when ChatGPT first came out, you were very impressed what you get out without critically thinking about it. We've still got to think critically. And I think probably the attitude I always say is AI is an employee. And if you had a new employee come along and give you a nice report that looked really nice, you'd review it and you'd critique it. Well, it's no different. It's really the same thing.
Tanya, one of the risks for organisations that perhaps aren't embracing AI through their business is that their staff are getting on and using it anyway, but without admitting it or without telling anyone. Is that a risk for your business? And have you got policies or guidelines in place to manage that?
Yeah, I think like any business, there's a lot of risks that we have to, review and look at. We do have policies in place, and those policies are quite strict. And if people step outside of those policies, there are consequences. That doesn't stop people from doing things that you may not be aware of. But what we do, we monitor our email gateway, so we can see, if staff are sharing AI-generated documentation. And it hasn't happened thus far, so that's good. So, obviously we've got a trusting organisation, but, there is always going to be temptation, but we try to continually update our staff. We've got a lot of young lawyers here who obviously want to start to delve into this whole AI world, and I don't blame them. I think it's quite exciting, but, what we try to help them with is understand that there's a lot of learnings for them by not jumping straight into AI. I mean, AI, yes, can do a whole lot of that early research for you and come up with, scenarios and advice. But, if the younger lawyers aren't doing that, they're not going to be the matter expert at the end of the day. So we try to instill that in them from the time that we employ them, and continue to talk that through them, but with the promise that we're continuing to pilot different ideas around AI as well, because, we're going to have to get there eventually.
And Tanya, I'll stick with you here, but there's obviously privacy consent issues around using AI to analyse emails, transcripts, client materials. Have you kind of started to grapple with those at NV Law at all? I'm particularly thinking about some of those fantastic tools that allow you to transcribe the outcomes of meetings and what have you. How do you manage the consent issues?
We actually are piloting that at the moment, and again, we have written some policies around the use of transcribing meetings and giving again the lawyers or the people that are using them the tools so they know what they're doing. First and foremost, it's about seeking permission, from anyone that's in that meeting, regardless whether it's a client or another lawyer that might be coming to represent another side, or other administrative staff that may be in the room. Everyone needs to give consent. And then it comes down to, well, what are you doing with that information? What needs to be stored? Where does it have to be stored? How is it stored? How long do we store it for? So it's that data capture. It's really important that we make sure that we've got strong policies and the follow through and the monitoring of that and the auditing of that needs to happen along the way as well. Those deletion rights, making sure that they exist and how long, again, as I said, to keep that data.
Nathan, are your customers interacting directly with AI tools at the moment, and have you sort of grappled with consent issues around that?
Yeah, they are. Probably the key scaled implementation of that for us is with our live chat function. Chatbots aren't new, quality chatbots though, and what we're seeing at the moment is relatively new in comparison to older chatbots from the last 5 years. So we are very upfront about the fact that it is a chatbot. And I think, look, even as we step into the space of something like voice, we have a voice assisted agent engaging with you. We'll continue to be very deliberate. We will give customers the option, like this is a way to be able to solve your issue faster, but if you'd like to speak to a person, it might take a little bit longer. And so that's very much about being upfront and providing choice. I would say, particularly with the release we did earlier this year, we're seeing some really good, what we call containment, which is effectively to say a customer's asking a question, we can solve that with an AI assisted agent. That means they get their answer faster and they're not coming back. And so that's been really promising for us. But yeah, for us around policy and responsible AI, it is about consent and being upfront with customers. I don't think anyone likes being deceived, and that's really important for us to be upfront with customers.
Greg, from your point of view, what types of financial data would you personally never be putting into a public AI tool, and what would you be advising your clients around that?
Nothing in a public AI tool. It's maybe if you had sample data from somewhere else, which you would have learned how to analyse or something like that, you might do. But in a public tool, absolutely nothing. I think I always say to clients, if you have got your enterprise AI tool like Copilot or Gemini or whatever, then absolutely put your financials in there and ask the questions, and you might come back and ask me questions about it. They're a good way to. It is a great way to get an understanding pretty quickly of financials, whether it's business structure or ratios or business performance or whatever it might be, risks, those sorts of things. It can be a good conversation starter for it, but nothing in a public tool.
And Tanya, I'll ask you this as well. I mean, do you think there are data sets that SMEs should just be treated as off limits entirely, and it is a financial? What else is there that you'd be putting in that category?
Yeah, well, likewise, without an enterprise agreement, I think things like client legal files, any sensitive financial data, health information, children's data, it's a no-go zone. Employment, salary information, or any sort of strategic documents that you wouldn't want out in that public domain. I think the misuse could harm a client or a staff member or a third party. Should never go in an uncontrolled AI space from our perspective.
Same for us. I think it's just good practice, right? It's really, really important. I think Greg makes a great point. For us, the biggest scaled implementation in rolling out AI has been deploying Copilot with Microsoft. And that's good because you can make sure that it's not trained on any external models, so it's in your enterprise architecture. But I think it's also helped where your tagging of different documents that are confidential. We established that probably a year before we stepped into Copilot. So all of our data documents across the organisation were tagged and restricted in certain ways. And look, that's not just important in terms of the availability of the data in public models. It's also important in the availability of that data across your organisation, who's meant to have access to that and who's not. Because you really don't want sensitive salary information being plugged into a tool where I can check the salary of you, Greg, right? Like, it's just not something that you want. So I do think both Google and Microsoft offer a pretty safe way to step into the space and make sure that you've got that visibility and those data access controls in place. But even then, it's nothing without strong policy, and I still think strong training in a way that's easily digestible for everybody across the organisation.
And how do you keep a human in the loop for decisions which materially affect customers?
I mean, Greg, you had a good example of that. I mean, some of those decisions, you're not actually letting AI make decisions yourself. I think first and foremost, I would say for most small businesses, with the exception of a few that are maybe a little bit more advanced and actually have the right mechanisms or controls in place, I would be ensuring that AI is kind of making recommendations, but for the most part, it's not making decisions autonomously. So I think that's a really big thing for us. But yeah, human in the loop for us is a variety of different mechanisms. It can be making sure that each individual action is assessed by a human. Where we look at more larger scale implementations for us, it's things like having observability logs, anomaly detection, so where we detect a high degree of toxicity, lifting that up and making sure that that alarming is going to someone to be able to have a look. So there's varying degrees of that based off a use case. I think the simplest thing for small to medium businesses to take a step in that direction, but actually make sure that AI is not autonomous in the way that it's operating for the most part. You can have a human in the loop, and then as you feel more confident or you've got a better kind of observability capability, and we'll see some of this start to come out with different software providers for sure, as they kind of embed more AI into their tools, then I think you can start to look at what do I want to expose, how do I want certain agents to be more autonomous. But first and foremost, I'd say let it make the recommendation, don't let it take the action in its own right.
And in terms of sort of keeping data safe, we talked about data retention rules, deletion rules a little bit earlier. If you're giving advice to a small business, how would you be suggesting that they hold on to data? How long should they keep it for? What does that look like, and how secure does it need to be?
I think I'd actually make it pretty basic, and we've gone through. Look, as a telco industry, we've gone through a bit of this recently. Why are you holding the data? Like, you've got to answer that question first and foremost, because what's its purpose? If you're not able to define its purpose in a way that it passes the litmus test, don't do it. Just don't hold it. And I think in some ways, not just the legacy of something like Telstra, but a lot of businesses probably hold on to data that they don't need and they probably shouldn't have. And so you can reduce your risk by just not having it. That's the simplest way of looking at it. I do think there are good tools yet again coming around to like your different enterprise tools. There are definitely elements of scale providers like a Microsoft or a Google where you can feel quite confident in a lot of the embedded security they have on their platforms, which is easier than necessarily needing to put that over the top yourself. But certainly, the higher degree of sensitivity of the data, the more secure it needs to be. Tanya did a great job of talking about a lot of the things that you wouldn't put into a public model, you wouldn't use. They're the types of things you need to get the most secure. But at the end of the day, if you don't need it, if there's not a really strong purpose for having it, get rid of it. It's in everybody's best interests, whether it's your customers, whether it's your own risk profile. I think that's the simplest thing to do.
Greg, coming back to you, I mean, you obviously are using AI to sort of put in prompts that might be supporting your clients. How do you store those prompts? Are they just in the AI system, or do you sort of lock them down differently, or how does that work?
Gemini has this great feature called gems, and if you're doing things over again, over and over, you save it as a gem. And so create your prompt, and you're always going to go back and refine it typically, but open up a gem and just insert a document or a basic could be started on this process thing, and it'll just operate that prompt you've already saved. That's one way of doing it, which I do a lot of. And sometimes if it's about just for a client in particular, I'll just have Google Doc in a client's folder of prompts, Gemini prompts in that. It's probably the easiest way,
And Tanya, from a kind of a confidentiality perspective in your business as a law firm, have you grappled with questions about storing AI prompts and outputs, and what's your conclusion there?
Sorry. Yeah, I guess there's some risks involved, and so the risks are like creating discoverable records that did not previously exist, and so that's a concern for us. Spend a bit of time in the courts, and the last thing you need is things that you don't really need to be there. And so it's about do you really need that data, and sort of privilege waiver concerns is also something to consider. And I think the inadvertent storage of sensitive client data in third-party environments, as I said previously, if you don't have that enterprise scenario in place, And I think lack of clarity of retention of that data is also a concern. So making sure that you've got those, that governance and that policy to make sure you know how long you're retaining any of the data that you have. I guess for us at MV, we would treat AI outputs as a formal work product and apply the same document management confidentiality controls that we do on all of our files.
Right, now we're going to move on now and talk about risk and governance frameworks, which I know is why everyone is really keen, because it's thrilling stuff. But Nathan, from your point of view, what does good enough governance look like? If you're talking to a business of 10 to 50 people or something like that, and they're looking to put AI into the business, how good does their governance need to be?
I wouldn't start with big kind of bureaucracy and overhead, to be perfectly honest. It's a really good way to kind of deliver the alternative outcome. For small businesses, I think the core principle is to have a really strong policy around it, but make it really simple. Like, it shouldn't be more than 1 to 2 pages. Make it really easy to understand. Everybody needs to understand that. So I'd start there. Similar to what we were just speaking about with stuff like Essential 8, some of those principles actually hold over to good AI governance as well. So if I look at putting one person in the business kind of accountable for AI tooling and that AI policy, and responsible governance is key. I'd be looking at auditing, so being really clear in terms of what tools are you using, who is meant to have access to them, what data is meant to go into them, and then making sure that you're reviewing the output of that and reviewing the policy end to end. I'd say pretty frequently. Like, the more you can do it, the better. And I only say that because the speed at which it moves. They're the kind of core principles. I think if you're making it overly complex, people won't engage with it. And if they're not engaging with it, they're probably not doing it right. And so I'd keep it pretty basic, but centre it around a really simple policy, and then a really effective way to kind of have that accountability with some of the organisation and track, audit, measure, and refine as you go.
And obviously you sort of talked earlier about how you switch things on, you switch things off in Telstra and sort of keep moving. So there's obviously been a lot of development over the last couple of years, I guess, in this space. What risk lenses do you apply before you turn a new AI feature on?
That's pretty broad. We don't, for very good reasons, have a very simple AI governance at Telstra, but that's because we have a very comprehensive AI risk committee. So every AI use case has to be assessed by our risk committee. It goes through things like what kind of data, what use case is there a human in the loop, what observability do we have in terms of understanding what it's using, what's the technology behind it, the model behind it. So as you can imagine, that's pretty comprehensive. Nothing is deployed into even test environments until that's there. So we're pretty comprehensive in the way that we run that. That's been effective. I think the key thing for us has been making sure that, to my point around observability, we've got a lot of that at scale, irrespective of the tool. So whether it's something from Microsoft or whether it's something we've developed in-house using certain models, we're actually able to say, yet again, is there toxicity, what's coming through, is there anomaly detection, any of the risks that we're kind of categorised us then putting into that production, how we're tracking and making sure we're responding to that, what's the process, how do we take that offline, but at the same time also making sure that, which I think it would really, really important as we see this at scale, whether it's a small business or a large business, tracking the decisioning, what informs an agent's decision, how do they go about that, and the traceability of decisioning is going to be really important. So there's a lot of work that we've done as an organisation to not rush into AI, but set out those foundations. And a big part of the foundations, as we spoke to earlier, was making sure our data and our data quality, data platforms is right. The other really big part of that is making sure our observability, our tooling, all of our responsible AI governance processes and controls can be put in place before we deploy something. That's key for us. Obviously, it's a very different end of the spectrum. But I do think those core principles will be there, and yet again, there are some elements of tools from like a Microsoft or Google where it has a bit of that embedded, or it's a pretty safe environment because it's not being exposed in the same way. But I do think we'll see some of what we're stepping into as a large organisation filter its way down into different tools from software providers over time. And that's just going to help give you that confidence, especially in an area like legal, that you can have the traceability of how something happened. How that created a positive outcome, or in a case where it's negative, look to rectify that and resolve that.
And Greg, in your business, very different scale, of course, to Telstra, but what do you think about in terms of risk lenses when you're thinking about a new AI feature?
I think probably, I was just thinking, as Nathan was talking, that obviously with a very small business where there's just 1 or 2 employees, you can be a lot more nimble. You don't need all the pages and the reams of procedures, and they've got to tick the boxes and everything else. And so it presents actually 2 sides to that. One is you can, being a lot more nimble, you can just, that sounds like a good idea, I'm going to do it, which I often do. You can develop things very quickly, right? By lunchtime you've got something out. By lunchtime today, not lunchtime 2 months' time. On the other hand, there obviously presents risk that you might do something that wasn't such a great idea, didn't think about this. And I think probably, I would say, from my point of view, it's all within Google Workspace. And I typically roll stuff out where I test it myself first, and where it's a scripted project where there are multiple steps along the way, I don't just hit the go button and just go and forget about it. It's going to send me, or I'll be looking at each step to make sure that it's not going to fail, and at the end has the spend money transaction or whatever it might be that it's done, has it actually worked? I'll be manually looking at that sort of stuff. So once I've looked at a couple of dozen manually and I know they're going through on time without error, then I become more confident that it's working properly. It's iterative.
Tanya, do you have a view on who carries responsibility ultimately if an AI-assisted decision causes harm? Is it the vendor, is it the employee, or the business? And how do you document that?
Yeah, well, I guess you can't sort of outsource professional responsibility to software. So I think ultimately the responsibility lies with the business, even if you're using a third party. And I think, there's ways that we can mitigate that, I guess, by, what we've said before about having, good governance and policies, risk registers, vendor contracts, even to that extent. I mean, they're good to have, but, at the end of the day, the responsibility will still lie with the business who the client enlists the services from. I think the duty to the client cannot be delegated to software.
I think it's a good principle.
It's a great principle. Most of the contracts you'll find kind of the responsibilities with you. It won't actually sit with the software vendor. So that as a principle, irrespective of whatever you've got back into, I think is the right thing to carry. Yeah.
And probably a good reminder that you should read the terms and conditions before you click on them and sign them.
And at the end of the day, you still probably click on them and sign them anyway.
Nathan, I'll come to you on this. If a regulator, excuse me, if a regulator was asking for evidence of how you were using AI responsibly, what policies or documentation would you be able to point to support that? And what would you expect a cautious small business to have in place before adopting AI?
So a little something I spoke to earlier actually. I think for us it starts with our responsible AI framework, the controls we have in place, proving out we have the controls in place, stuff like observability, where we've got toxicity measures, making sure the alarm is in place, where decisions have been made, showing that the process of a decision. So again, that kind of sets the foundation of what we're doing, and obviously we're a regulated industry, so we kind of started there. It takes a little bit longer, but it's all right, it's part of the journey. But look, I think for me, even for a small business, it still comes back to that. It sounds silly when you're talking about something as cool as AI, but it really does start with like the policy first and foremost. And if you list out the policy and you can show that you have certain controls in place and the controls were effective or they weren't effective, I think that's where you start. That's where you get a look first. There are certainly elements of data and where data goes that is obviously part of that as well. But yeah, that's for me where it starts. If you don't have that, you can kind of see what goes wrong, right? But yeah, that's I think equally important for a small business as it is a big business like Telstra, just as a principle.
Tony, did you want to add anything
Oh,
to
I
that?
think I'd say ditto. Exactly the same.
All right, well, we're going to just talk now about sort of practical first steps and where you might start if you're looking to put AI into your business. So Greg, I'll come to you. If you had 1 week, zero budget, no time, which would be most small businesses probably, what AI pilot would you run in a small business and how would you measure it?
Well, I'd run in the enterprise side of. I like Google Workspace a lot because it's incredibly easy to use compared to Microsoft stuff, particularly, and the integration of AppScript within Docs and Sheets and things makes it, well, in my experience, way easier. So I would be looking to say an easy place to start is to look at a process in your business that you're repeating all the time, and then laying that out, describing it well within Gemini to say, this is what I do, this is what happens, ask me more questions, have a conversation with Gemini about that, to talk about how you might automate this process. And invariably it's going to involve with a script, with a combination of AI as well, to make the process happen. It's a longer process. Getting started is not going to be a quick win. Getting started is always, what do you say? An innovator, early adopters and innovators, they spend the most money, they waste the most money, they go broke more than anyone else. It always is the case with tech anyway. They're doing the learnings. If they come out the other side well, then they've done the best. If you're not an innovator, if you're not an early adopter, that's fine. You'll do it more safely.
Nathan, if you were going to recommend 1 or 2 tools to a SME, what would be in your starter kit?
Yeah, I'll probably start there. Swing around a bit. I think most organisations are probably running some form of Microsoft or Google setup. Both are good in different ways. I kind of tend to agree. I'm a very big Microsoft shop, big fans of Microsoft's, but I do think Google have probably done a slightly better job of embedding a lot of the capability into their tools natively. I think Microsoft's a little bit behind on that one. But it does give you a good opportunity to be able to scale it at the hands of everybody in your business, assuming you want them to. That obviously the right access controls and some of the pieces I talked about earlier that are really important in terms of document tagging, making sure that data's in the right place. So I'd start there. I think Greg's suggestion is awesome. And it's so critical for us. Scaling Copilot to 21,000 people has been a really interesting exercise. It is difficult because it's really easy to give up on when it doesn't work the first time. It takes a long time to get good at it. And I might sound a bit conservative here, but my experience has been, I'm not sure a huge amount of training gets you that better at it. I think there's a huge part of actually just being on the tools and using it and learning that's a lot more effective. And I think where we've seen great success is people sharing how they're using the tooling. That kind of, not crowdsourcing, but it's almost like a community practice type thing at the scale of Telstra, because it gets people talking about it and kind of continues to uplift that engagement. I also think that both Gemini and Copilot have some cool studio capabilities. So if you're not super great at scripting in the way that Greg is, you can do there are some cool no-code ways to start to build your own agents and just test and muck around with that. So I'll probably start there. I think inevitably for a lot of small businesses, they've probably got different software tools today that are coming and wanting to talk about their AI features. That can become expensive pretty quick. And so I would just I just caution, right? I think there are some great features there, but it can become expensive. I think starting with something safe and secure like Gemini or Copilot in the different Microsoft to Google environments is a great place to start.
And in the AI space, more generally, I'll ask you, Nathan, and then we'll point to Greg. What's one thing you tried that didn't work, and how can others help avoid that detailing?
Actually, it kind of comes back to the point I made before. I mean, we rolled out Copilot to 21,000 people. We did a lot of training, and we kind of went, go. And it's hard to expect people are just going to lift that up. I think one of the stories you and I spoke about in the podcast, right, was at the start with all of our software engineers, they just weren't using the tools. I found it super fascinating, and we're lucky enough that more of our grads, our junior engineers, were the ones that wanted to jump on board early. And we had this incredible engineer, and she took us through a showcase of what she built using GitHub Copilot, which is a version of Copilot in the software engineering space. And the first question I asked her was like, how did this make you feel? Like, what was the process of kind of taking this into production? And her answer was, I felt like it was cheating. Like, I hated it. I still kind of hate it. And so it kind of just exemplified the really human element to it. Like, am I enjoying using this? Does it fundamentally change how I think about how I go about my work? And so it took a long time for us, and it was good because we had a lot of the junior developers, the junior engineers really pushing the senior engineers, and it became a little bit competitive. We're now at the point at which it's less about whether the tool's good or whether they want to use it because it feels like cheating, and it's more of a conversation around, can we use this tool instead, which is always fun. But yeah, there's a real human element to driving that adoption that's important, and I think if you don't recognise the change impact on people, you're not going to be super successful. You'll find people dabble with it. I'm sure all of us remember having those like little Google Home speakers. You'd ask it 3 questions and it plays some music, you got a laugh out of it, and then you asked it the weather and it gave you the weather for Alberta. And you're like, oh, well, this thing's useless. And then it just became a speaker or a really nice paperweight somewhere in your office. And so I do think you've got to kind of continue to look at the people, the change element, figure out how you can build a bit of a culture around it. And we're fortunate enough in an organisation the size and scale of Telstra, that's top down, even for our board members. And in fact, most of our board members, when I get a chance to chat, is they just want to know what you're using AI for, which is cool. It's great. So yeah, I would say no specific example, just a really big people impact and change impact you're pretty conscious of.
And Greg?
I've deliberately forgotten about a lot of my failures because they're pretty frequent. But I think probably one that comes to mind would be in Google Workspace, in Gmail, there's a thing called Workspace Studio. And if you've ever used something like make.com, it's a bit of a competitor to make.com, but it's built in, so it makes sense to have a play with it. And it came out only about, a few months ago, not long. And I jumped on as soon as I could. I thought it was pretty cool. I did some stuff with it, and I just somehow created all these extra labels and things were going on my Gmail that I never intended, and it created a big mess that I had to manually clean up. So that was a recent failure, recent learning experience, but probably come down to, I don't know whether it was a prompt or whether it was just a rule I had set wrong or something in that. But the tools can get, I suppose that's the thing with agents, and when you set the AI to work to do something, this is the caution, I guess, and the lesson learned is that like an employee, you don't want them to do stuff until you know that what they're going to do is what you intend. And it wasn't sending emails, but it was doing the rules of my emails, whatever it was. It wasn't just standard email filters, it was doing a bit more than that, and I just made a big mess in my inbox.
There's no escape from that inbox.
So that's the inbox, no.
Look, at this point, we might just open the floor to our audience and see if there's any questions anyone would like to sort of pose.
Hi Greg, thanks. I'm Deborah. I run a small stakeholder engagement business for infrastructure projects. And Greg, I'm really interested because I also run Google Workspace and Gemini is completely embedded. I use